Hey guys, it's Shinoo at InoKinetic. Welcome back to our latest video. Today I want to talk to you about the things that you should consider. In fact, I've come up with an acronym, the ABC squared of modding your car, right? So what are the things that you ought to be thinking about before you either buy a car that's been heavily modified or think about modifying your existing car, right? So I've distilled it into an acronym, the ABC squared. There's two C's actually. So I'm borrowing a bit of a page from a book that my brother-in-law Tim wrote about the ABCs of marriage. This is the ABC squared of modding your car. So let's jump straight into it. What are the ABCs, right? Access, benefits, consultation, costs. So let's talk about each one of those. We'll start with access. Before I jump into that, what prompted this? This last few weeks, even few months, we've been inundated with cars that are broken and in need of TLC, right? Clients have been sending us cars, and I'm talking about local cars. I'm talking about cars from around the country that are broken for various reasons. Many times it's been from large modifications that have been made to the car that have resulted in some unintended or undesirable consequences. So it got me thinking that why don't I make a video that talks a bit more about what you should think about. How do you educate yourself before you jump into a modification? Or, in particular, those of you that are buying modified cars thinking that you're going to save a lot of money because the first owners made all the mods, you might be in jeopardy of having some hidden costs that you aren't necessarily aware of. So, anyhow, let's get straight into this, the ABC squareds. The A is for access. Do you have access to the proper tools to do this work yourself? Or do you have access to a shop that you trust that's professional and capable of doing the modification that you are considering buying? Or maintaining the car that is highly modified that you are thinking about buying, right? Another critical access that I want you to consider is, do you have access to the original vendor or supplier of the part or the modifications that were made to that car, or the modifications that you're planning on making to your own car? Do you have access to that vendor? We are getting frequent phone calls, emails, inquiries from people that are unable to reach certain vendors. And in some cases, those vendors are no longer in business. You know, the automotive aftermarket is a bit of the Wild West, man. There are, people out there that are here today, gone tomorrow. And you want to be cognizant of that. And in particular, when you buy a highly modified car, do the research. Find out, do you have access to the vendor that made the parts that are on that car? Before you decide to put a part on your car, can you actually reach that vendor? Do they respond to your emails? Do they pick up the phone and actually talk to you? That should be a very, very important consideration before you decide to go down the path, okay? So there are a lot of great vendors in the automotive aftermarket, but there are some fly-by-night operations as well. So be cognizant of the fact that it is a bit of the Wild West, and I would say buyer beware, okay? So that gets into really the B, or benefits. Do the benefits that this modified car or this modification you are considering, is it greater than the potential downsides, right? There generally are downsides to almost every modification that you make, right? When an OEM engineer has to deliver a car that's homologated to meet the needs and requirements of a country that they're importing to. So, for example, when Lotus is trying to import a car into the U.S., this is the most difficult country in the world to homologate a car and meet the emissions requirements, the safety requirements, all these legislative requirements that we have in this country, right? So OEM engineers have to weigh the cost, with the budget that they have and the performance and reliability that they can deliver, right? So in the aftermarket, there are downsides to almost everything that you might consider, okay? And the downside might be the added cost, but in other cases, it could come in the form of unreliability. It could come in the form of reduced drivability, right? So all this power that you added to the car, and all of a sudden around town, it just drives really, really poorly, right? Or it's stressing your powertrain to the point where you've got to rebuild your gearbox more frequently, right? Or it requires a stronger clutch because now it's blowing your clutch, right? So understand very, very clearly what are some of those downsides, and are those things that you're willing to tolerate, right? So a perfect example is suspensions, okay? An OEM suspension typically needs to be rebuilt every 50,000 miles, okay? If you go to a racing shock, like Nitrons or our Race Techs or Olin's, you can get more performance from the car. Not only can you extract more performance on the track, but you can actually get more comfort as well. But it comes at a cost, and that is more frequent rebuilds. If you wait 50,000 miles to rebuild your aftermarket racing shocks, those shocks are going to be probably worn out, okay? And you need to build in the cost of the rebuilds, right? So that kind of gets me to the first of the 2 C's, right? Consult. Consult with people that have already done the modification. Talk to somebody, email them, have a real conversation. And I'm not talking about just read what's posted on a forum, okay? There are shills that operate on forums for vendors, okay? Posting up all sorts of, let's just say, fakery, fake news, let's just call it, okay? My advice to all of you is don't believe everything that you read on the internet, which obviously goes without saying. I think in this day and age, we should know that, right? So try to actually reach somebody. Ask the vendor that's selling the part, do they have any customers that might be willing to talk about the pros and cons of that modification? Don't hesitate to inquire and do a little bit more due diligence before you jump straight in and do that, right? So then that brings us really to that final C. What is that second C? And that's the costs, right? Costs are really the critical thing here that a lot of us oftentimes don't really consider. So I will tell you straight away, I'll tell this to people, if you cannot afford to reverse what you're about to modify, do not do it, okay? If it's taking all your money to buy the part and pay a shop to install this thing, and you can't afford to go back to stock and have it all removed, then you're not quite ready to do this modification. Because there are potential downsides of that mod that you make may not actually work the way you had hoped it to. And you may be happier if you could go back to stock. So put aside some extra money so that if you've got to reverse it, you certainly can do that, right? The other side of it is, like we had mentioned earlier, the cost of, for example, racing shocks. There's the rebuild cost that is going to come every 3 to 5 years that you ought to bake into your budget so that you know that that's going to be an additional cost that you're going to incur if you make that modification, right? You know, there are these highly modified cars that I will say to you, you want to be very, very cognizant. May cost you a lot more money to get that car to work the way you want it to. And that might mean removing the entire engine and completely putting in a fresh engine and removing that power adder as an example, okay? We used to remove the turbo kits from any Lotus that came in here. Now we actually have some tunes so we can actually tune the turbo cars. But it comes at a price. And so recognize that the costs of the modification can be very, very significant. There could be these hidden costs that you need to be aware of, so budget accordingly, right? An educated consumer is a smarter consumer. So I would encourage every one of you to be thinking along those lines before you buy that modified car or you modify your existing car, right? So remember the ABC squared of modding your car: access, benefits, consultation, and the real cost of the modification. So hope you enjoyed that video. If you have any questions, don't hesitate. post your questions down below. Give us a call. Email us. We will respond to you, okay? We've got the Sessions with Shinoo feature on our website if you want to lock in some free time to talk to me about something that you're considering on your car. And I'm happy to get on the phone with you or a Zoom call and chat through whatever issue that you might have. So thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll see you next time.